All right, all set, Nick.
All right, I'll pass off to Chris, who's the vice chair, and we'll go from there.
All right. So it's 5 o'clock on May 27th of 2021, and I would like to call to order this Scarborough Board of Assessment Review meeting. Tracy, would you do a roll call for us?
Karela,
Present.
David,
Here.
Charles,
Present.
Matt,
Here.
Chris,
Here.
Joe Wood.
Here.
Beautiful. All right, if we all could, I'll start us in on the Pledge of Allegiance. That'd be wonderful. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
United
the
States
United States of America,
and to the
and to the
republic,
republic for which it stands,
nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice for all. Wonderful.
Look at that.
All the hard stuff's done.
Chris, are we okay to go on to the next thing, introductions?
We are, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I think we're good. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, I'll start just by explaining that this is a bit unusual for this board in the sense that the usual reason to meet is a hearing for an official appeal case, but since there isn't one currently and there are new board members, we thought it was wise to meet so you could go over, not only get to know who's on the board now, but go over who's in what roles and duties, and also discuss the rules and procedures as you see fit. And before we get into any of the more official business, I had asked Chris if we could, I could explain some things, and then Durwood could as well, in terms of a little background information, especially for those of you that are new to the board, and welcome to everybody. As I explained, the context of this board is usually as an as-needed occasion. So the context of all of that, a very broad overview is, as the Town of Scarborough Assessing Office, every year annually, as of April 1st each year, we are mandated by the state to assess all real estate properties as well as personal property in the town. And then as a result of that April 1st assessment date, those values are committed annually, and that generally happens in August in Scarborough. And that's what generates the tax bills for the year for the real estate property taxes in town. And those bills go out in September and March accordingly. When people, those values and assessments are officially committed in August, people then have the opportunity, if they haven't already discussed with me, if they feel their valuations are require review and they'd like to appeal those in any way, we encourage taxpayers to reach out to myself and my fellow staff first, informally, if they're comfortable with that, to discuss, and they often do. And that's usually an opportunity for us to resolve any inaccuracies, if that's what's at play, or if they want to provide any documentation or proof to support a different valuation, and we can consider that in a more informal way and resolve accordingly. If they have information that justifies an adjustment in the assessment, we can certainly do that if it's warranted. Then if they choose not to take that more informal approach, or if they do, and I disagree with the extent of their issues for review, then it is within their right up to 185 days after the commitment date to formally appeal that assessment for that year. And what happens in that instance is, if they choose to take that more formal route, they file an application with the assessing office, a written document, and then can provide any supporting documentation with that application for abatement. Once receiving that, I have 60 days to review that, and I can also have certain information requests based on some laws like the 706A request. We don't need to know all of those terms, but it allows me to gain more information from the taxpayer to conduct a thorough review. And then when that 60-day timetable is up, I issue a decision, and I can either accept, deny, or accept in part. And then once that has all come to pass, they have another 60 days after receiving that decision to, if they still disagree or want to appeal further, to then appeal to this board. It's possible this is overview for all of you, but I thought it would provide the context for what it is you do. And then in the rules and regulations and procedures of your board, which you were sent that document, it explains in the context of the hearing what would come to pass, the order of the assessor speaking, the a taxpayer speaking, and your deliberation process and your rules and procedures for findings of fact of your decision. Durwood can certainly go into that in more depth. But I'm happy to relate that this board is completely independent of my office. Even though I'm taking the lead today, you have the decisions to be made kind of like a jury, if you will, in that hearing between what the assessment is, what the assessor determined, and what the taxpayer is providing for information. So other than in this one meeting here, that's more informal and more of a workshop at this point until we get to the election of officers and whatnot, which is more official. In a normal meeting, I would only be speaking in the context of your rules and procedures and not the way I am tonight. I'm happy to answer more questions about assessing. Whenever any of you have questions, you can reach out to me personally, but that said, it can't be about an official case. Any official case or property would be more appropriate to discuss as a whole board, as if it's in the context of an appeal, and Durwood could speak about that as well. But if it's general assessing questions, I'm always happy to either directly speak with you and answer questions, or point you in the direction of printed resources. And I'm happy to do that with general questions whenever. Durwood, would you care to take the lead on more
Absolutely.
specifics?
Well, thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks for setting this up. It's great to see everybody again and see some new faces. I think the board was always a very high functioning board. We've always had great backup from the town too. In terms of coordination, you can't get a better assistant than Tracy in terms of making sure that things are running on time and the minutes are kept. And we've been
Amen.
through a lot of situations with snowstorms and whatnot. We'll probably get back to that now. The board seemed to work together well, and I have no reason to think it won't continue to in the past. So I just want to make a few comments. We're going to try to end this meeting by 6 o'clock too, just in case anybody's wondering. No need to drag into the evening on this. Nick used the term jury. You're like a jury, and I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. Or alternatively, you're like an appeals court. Like the Maine Supreme Court or even the U.S. Supreme Court. And so the best way to remember your role is to pretend that you're justices. And what would justices do and not do? What justices do is that they attempt to hear the evidence impartially, keeping an open mind. They don't talk to the parties outside of the hearing. They don't send emails. They don't come to a conclusion before all the evidence is presented. They're actively engaged in reading the materials and asking questions, and always presenting a fair demeanor. And so much of what this is about is making the process not just appear, but actually be a fair process. And that's what people complain about. They don't sometimes care so much if they win or lose. They just want to make sure the process is well run and that they've had a fair shake and a fair hearing. And I think the board has always accomplished that task. And so I do board workshops. I won't talk about all the things I talk about when I do board training, but just a couple of other no-nos is you shouldn't be traveling around and visiting somebody's property that might be a subject of an appeal. There might be an official site walk. In some cases, that might be valuable. but you shouldn't stop there after work and walk around. And nothing's going to stop you if the property is right on the road. You can slow down and obviously take a look at it. But getting out and walking around on somebody else's property is not best practices. You'd be surprised how many situations come up like that in other towns, and sometimes the people are on the wrong property. Another thing that board members often do is they attempt to do their own research, and they get on the internet, and of course we all know the internet has all sorts of information of all sorts. It could be right, wrong, it could be someplace in the middle. I'm not making at all any kind of political comments, but I've seen board members get way astray from their task, which is to review the materials in front of them and decide based on the materials in front of them and the testimony that they've heard, what their decision is. And if one side or the other can't meet their burden of proof, then based on those materials, then they don't win. If you do check something out, and there are sometimes situations where you might want to check a Google Earth or something to just figure out where you are compared to the property, then you should disclose what research you've done, and just so it's sort of open and clear and transparent, as they say all the time now. It's very transparent what you've done. Don't compile like a separate secret file on the case. That's really, really bad. Speaking of transparency, another very important topic is conflicts of interest. And there's two things to remember here. One is that there's a concept of conflict of interest, which involves having an economic interest in the outcome of the proceeding. And that would mean if you're a partner, you own stock in the company, anything that would lead to financial benefit, depending on how the appeal turned out. Now, in the context of property tax assessment review, that can be a little nebulous and drawn out. If you're a property owner in town and somebody else gets a certain break, does that mean you get the same break? I don't think these concepts go to an extreme. You're going to have to kind of use your common sense. It has to be a direct economic impact. So there's a conflict of interest, and then there's a more hazy and broad term appearance of a conflict of interest, and that's the harder to get your head around. And that's when there might be a special relationship between you and the party that's appearing before the board. I used to give some examples, kind of if someone is your business partner, for example, I think that could be a conflict of interest, or would be or if somebody is your brother. If maybe somebody is your eighth cousin twice removed and you've never seen him in your entire life, I might disclose that, and that's a big word, is disclosure, and get it out there, and it can be discussed by the board. When in doubt, you put the information out through disclosure, and then the board can decide, take a vote whether they think you have a conflict and need to recuse yourself. Err on the side of caution, but don't leave your common sense at the door. I tried to make up an example at another one of these trainings. You went to the University of Maine, and they put you in 1975, and they put you in a suite with 4 other kids, and there was one of them that left after the first semester, and you haven't seen him in 38 years, and he shows up at the board. Unless, I don't know, maybe you had a fight, or he owed you some money. If you haven't seen him, I don't think you have a conflict of interest. You might bring it up, though. You both have the University of Maine hat on or something, and he says, "Oh, I remember you," to inoculate yourself from that. But in a small town, of course, it's very difficult. There's all these relationships, but try to err on the side of caution. So I also want to pick up on what Nick was saying. Nick is a independent professional that runs the office, and he's always a party to one of these proceedings. It's not a good perfect analogy, but it's sort of like maybe he's like the district attorney, and I'm not saying that the property owners are the defendants, but he is like represents his office in the assessment, and you're the sort of checks and balances on what he does, and that's written into the system and statewide, so that there's a check before people have to go to court on they can correct any kind of real injustices in taxation. So just remember, he's super friendly, but he is and helpful, but he has got his role to play. And so in the hearings, in many cases, it's particularly the larger, more complex ones, he'll have his own attorney with him. And so I am the attorney for the board. And the only thing I try to look out for is making sure that the board's decision-making process they ran a good process and the decision-making was sound. I don't get involved in like deciding what the decision is, but I just try to help the process along. So I'm not working for Nick, I'm working for you as the board, and I'm not working for the council either. I have a unique independent role to represent you. So unless there's any questions, I want to just hit what I think probably is most important here is this the Board of Assessment Review rules and procedures and standards. A lot of towns, or most towns, actually don't have these written down, and this is a really pretty good document, although it's 15 years old now. Time flies, and maybe there's a few more modern cases that could be added to it, but it is really a good handbook on how the board conducts its business. And so I recommend that you have it handy, and if you could bring it with you to every meeting. I usually have a few extra in my briefcase when I come, because I haven't been to a meeting live in many months, so it'll be fun to actually get back and see people again. In terms of your organization, you can organize yourself any way you want, of course, and so much now is just on people's laptops. But if you're getting a bunch of paperwork, and you will get a bunch of paperwork on some of these more larger complex hearings, one thing I've seen people do is they just have like a separate bag, like a LL Bean tote bag or something like that. In fact, I've seen towns give out the bags, and you just put the stuff all in there, then carry it each time, and so then it's all in one place. And then if it's a carryover from a prior meeting, all your stuff's there, and it's handy and accessible. Of course, all of it has, most all of it's been emailed to you already. So just hitting the highlights, and the last thing you want to hear me is drone on. I just want to hit the highlights, and Nick mentioned one of them, which is somewhat unique, is that the assessor actually goes first in these proceedings. In other towns, the appellant goes first. Like if you're appealing something to, as I said, you're like the Supreme Court. If you're appealing something, the appellant, meaning the person that's got the grievance, goes first. But here, actually, the assessor goes first, and then the applicant goes second. They're supposed to pre-file their exhibits and their argument, so that gives you an opportunity to read up on basically what is being said. You'll have an opportunity after the assessor finishes his presentation to ask questions of the assessor. There'll be things that just you need clarification on, and same of the applicant. Occasionally, you'll have an applicant, and once in a while the assessor, but more often the applicant. And if the applicant has an attorney, wants to ask some questions of the assessor, that's okay, but it's done through the chair, and that's the policy, because we want it to be very controlled and not like out of control, Perry Mason style questioning, where isn't it a fact, and trying to make them cry and get close to them. That's why the questions are directed through the chair. So once all the documents are in and all the evidence has been considered, you also, one other thing, you allow the public to speak, although it's rare for anybody in the public to come to one of these proceedings. Then the hearing is closed. Tracy will keep control of all the paperwork that comes in, and that's very important. That's called the administrative record. Extremely important that be sort of safeguarded, that straight things don't disappear from it, or things don't show up into that record. But Tracy will always does a good job on that. So once the evidence closes, you begin your deliberations, and you're shortly going to elect a chair. Usually the chair kind of quarterbacks the deliberation process. And what I'd encourage is to ask everybody to participate in some way. And you could just say, who wants to go first? And sometimes you go to the person on the far left or the far right, however you want to do it. And hopefully everybody will weigh in. That's a really good process. If everybody has a question or a comment, it doesn't give you a lot of confidence if everybody just has their head down and they don't have anything to say. So try to be an active participant in the in the deliberations. The chair does vote though, so you need to talk about all the elements, and we'll talk about the legal standards in a second, but have a full discussion on it. But you shouldn't vote to either grant the appeal or the abatement or deny it that night until you've got actual written findings of fact and a reason for your decision. So Maine law is very clear. There's been many cases by the courts that said any board, any municipal board has to back up its decision making with a written decision, and that decision can't be just we heard your appeal and you lose. It's got to have some reasoning behind it. And as much as anything, the biggest reason that the cases often come back from the court is asking the board to clarify what they meant when they said this or that. So that's why some effort needs to be put into what your thinking was. I have served in the role, and you don't have to continue this, but you can, of listening and attending these meetings, particularly on the more complex ones, and taking a shot at writing findings of fact and conclusions based on what I hear in the deliberations. I try to emphasize over and over again that I don't decide. I'm just using this as a discussion piece for you, saving you some time that you've got something to work with. And I think Chris and Matt can bear out that a lot of times what I've written has been, not used or added to or rejected. And I encourage that because I don't want it to be like the rubber stamp of what the attorney said. It's just there as a talking point. So at that second meeting, you can approve the findings and then make your vote whether to grant or deny the appeal. Hopefully the ultimate decision you make matches up with the findings. If everything's wrong, and then you deny the appeal, everything's right, but you grant the appeal, that would be very odd. But I think that's again where your common sense will come in and guide you in the right direction. And I can talk to you more specifically about what you can do. You can grant the appeal, you can deny the appeal, or you could give a partial update, something in between. But if you're going to give something in between, you've got to base that on some reasoning. You can't just pull a number out of the hat. So that's the process. They get a written decision signed by the chair. They can appeal that to court, and Scarborough has had a few go to court, and it's interesting to see how they play out. And I track those cases and update the board about them as they go through the court system. So there's a big part of those materials is about the legal standards for what you're supposed to review, and there's basically two types of cases, which is one is a evaluation case, unjust evaluation case, where they're just contesting the value of the property, and then the other type of a case is the discrimination case. And I used to think before I started working with Scarborough that the discrimination cases are really rare. Actually, we've had several of them. And what the discrimination is, and I'm not talking about like the type of discrimination that you hear about so much in the media now. I'm talking about claims that one set of taxpayers is being treated differently than another set of taxpayers who are basically in the same situation. That's the essence of discrimination. In other words, we're beachfront owners and we've been treated different than these other similar beachfront owners, and there's not a good reason for that. So that's a potential discrimination claim, and so that's one type of case. But the other cases are just about unjust valuations and whether the valuation is correct. And we talk about that. The key buzzword on that is, before I talk about the buzzword, let me just say, again, the applicant, the appellant, has the burden of proof. They got to show that the assessor's determination was manifestly wrong, and that's a very high standard. Manifestly wrong. Think about that. That's like I don't know. It means like very wrong, extremely wrong, and that's a hard burden. Doesn't mean that people can't meet that, and they do meet that on a regular basis. But that's the standard you're supposed to apply. You got to prove both the assessor's work was wrong, and that you also have evidence showing what the right value is. And so that's the type of thing you're going to need to work through on your own in the deliberation phase of the hearing. It is possible, and we've done this, Chris and Matt will remember, to go into an executive session with me. Executive session means a closed door session. But the purpose of that is only to allow me to inform you about legal questions. You might ask, like, well, how does that case that they talk about, how does that work in here? How does this statute play? I don't understand that statute. That type of questions. It's not supposed to be a place where the board goes in secret and makes its decision and comes out and within 30 seconds announces its decision. In fact, it's absolutely not supposed to be that. And the times that towns have tried to pull that, they've gotten into, some hot water over that. So occasionally the board just needs some guidance on some of the legal part, and we'll have an executive session. Typically that's before the hearing. Matt or Chris, go ahead.
As an amendment to that one, thinking of it, maybe I'm interrupting you with it, unfortunately. We can't talk about anything outside of that hearing, period.
Yeah, let me emphasize that. You shouldn't email about it. You shouldn't call each other up and say, I really didn't understand that part of the hearing. Did you understand it? You shouldn't be talking about it on the phone. You shouldn't talk about it on email. You shouldn't be talking about it at the coffee shop. And you shouldn't be talking about it with other property owners or people in town or elsewhere. Because a judge would never do that. And your role is a little different than a council a council member. A council member, and I'm not using this term in a negative sense, they're politicians, and they're there to make policy and to get the input from citizens. Like, is this law a good law or a bad law? Should we spend money on this, spend money on that? And that's all about gathering with the people and getting input. But your role, again, is best way to remember it is like a appeals court judge. And if you can just keep that in mind, you're probably not going to get in much trouble. But yeah, no talking about it. One thing I've done, seen boards do is the draft findings come out and they get emailed, and then the people start emailing back and forth. What that amounts to is a private meeting over email, and that violates the law. So if you can just bear those basic fairness notions, use your common sense, we'll all be fine. And if I see something that I think is really off track, I'll say something. But again, it's not my show, and I think everybody's taking this job really seriously. And I like to think that people walked out of there saying like that was a fair process, and that's like the best we can do. So, Nick.
Not to change things on too much of a diversion here, but the thought just occurred to me, any given hearing can be an involved process. You just heard of all that goes into it, but I would reiterate that it's rather unusual for there to be several hearings in a given year, although it is possible. For example, in all of 2020, there were only 2 formal hearings. An example for the context of that would be there were, at my assessor level, there were something like 23 formal abatement applications to the assessor's office, but only 2 of those then escalated to the Board of Assessment Review. I can't say whether that's common or uncommon, because it's every year is different. If there's a revaluation year, which that was on the coattails of, you might even expect more than that, because in the year before that there was maybe 5 or so. Other people could speak to that, but just so you know about the months to come, there are none in the pipeline. So that means, other than meetings like this to discuss board rules and procedures, it is not looking like there will be any even possible within the next few months, because the appeal period has already passed. So the absolute soonest that there could be an appeal, it appears, would be after commitment in August, and then the whole time frame, say they appealed the very day after commitment, which would be unusual, it'd be 60 days after that, plus applying to you. So there won't be an official appeal hearing, it looks like, for several months, because the deadline for anything that could have has already passed for this past commitment.
Hey, Nick, along those lines, when I joined this board in 1880 or whatever year it was, there was a training set up by the state.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they have that anymore, but I went to it back then. It was like 2 hours long or something, and but it was good. I mean, it was. Is that still a possibility where we have as many new people on the board as we do?
Yes, I will look into that. I believe they just had one a couple months ago through the MMA, or even more recently, honestly. And I don't know if any of you attended that. I see David raising his hand.
Yeah, I've been to several MMA presentations, but with planning boards and zoning board of appeals, which is slightly different, but not a whole lot because they're both quasi judicial. So, yeah, I'm well versed in that. The last one they had, last several they've had have been Zoom meetings. And I think the quality of the Zoom meetings has been excellent. I've been to the in-person meetings and they're not quite as good. It's just a little bit unruly trying to manage that many people in a room at once. So yeah, I would highly encourage people to attend those.
Yeah, so I would look on the MMA's website, and also I will ask my contacts and forward anything to all of you if I catch wind of anything. But I don't think there's any right now because one just happened, but I think they do it a couple times a year. Good point. That's it for my interjection there.
I'm open to any questions about the process of the law. I agree with David that the basic modus operandi, how you operate in this board, is very similar to your role as a quasi judicial role on the zoning board or the planning board. Very similar. And the main thing, of course, is to follow the rules. Don't make up your own rules.
This is certainly up to all of you as the board, but if any of you would like to introduce yourself, since you are new to each other in this context, I would encourage you to feel free to do that. For example, if Chris and Matt, having been on the board, if either of you wanted to say something about your time on the board that could get things rolling.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind going first on that. Chris Herrick. I live on West Beach Ridge Road. We've been here for about 13 years in Scarborough, all on West Beach Ridge Road. And it's a wonderful town. So I started on this board and a couple others just based off of really enjoying the town. And they send out those pleas every once in a while, like, please, we have nobody on any of these boards. So I decided to hop in on that. And this one I've stuck on during that time. It's been enjoyable. There's hard moments and there's been a few late nights. But it is enjoyable to get it right. And if you can keep the emotion out of it, and make it black and white, you can walk out of the room at the end of the hearing feeling good about yourself. So that's nice, and feeling like you did a public service. I can't really think anything else to say, but that's.
My name is Matthew Chamberlain. I've been on the board, I'm going to say 4 years, Tracy, something to that effect. It's been interesting. I didn't actually get to go to any formal classes to kind of put this together and understand what was happening. So it was trial by fire. But I've been a licensed real estate broker for about 27 years. So I have a little appreciation for values and people coming in for their opinions. I've been a resident here of Scarborough for 32-ish years. I live off of Pine Point Road. It's very different from what I originally thought it was going to be. I expected a lot of just unhappy homeowners coming in, and we've dealt with a lot of commercial and some unique circumstances that I never dreamed of, but got to take part of. And I will certainly say that it's been an adventure. I very much appreciate having Durwood by my side to answer the questions that I didn't have a clue to figure out on my own. But I'm glad I've stuck with it, and I think you will all enjoy it if we actually get to see a little bit of frontline action. Thank you.
Let me just jump in. So I'm new. Probably pretty evident. Name's Charles Konozak. I've been in Scarborough. I've been in the greater Portland area for about a decade, but I've been in Scarborough on Dodge Street for 4 years now. What really drew me to this board, I'm on 2 boards. Hopefully I don't get in over my head with commitment. But, after 4 years, I just really wanted to be a bigger part of the town. Kind of in tandem, I'm doing Kiwanis and some other service organizations. And this is just a great way for me to just jump in and I guess kind of echo what Matthew said, trial by fire for me. Certainly those trainings, I feel to give the board my best effort. I would love you to send them my way and I'll certainly attend them. Just kind of a little bit about myself, Mainer born and raised in Manchester outside of Augusta, went to the University of Maine, Orono, was a scientist for about a decade, Jackson Lab Envirologics in Portland. And now I run a virtual meeting management company where we deploy technicians to run these meetings. And our main clientele is lawyers and law firms in the Portland, Maine area. And we run depositions. So I'm reading through these rules. The integrity of the record and the fact finding really speaks to me. So I'm already feeling comfortable with that. And as I read through it, I certainly do have questions, but I'll kind of save it for the end and let other people speak. So just a hello, and hopefully I integrate well and give you guys a good effort.
I'll go next. I'm Dave Bork. I know it says David up there, but call me Dave, please. So I'm a new resident of Scarborough. I've only been here for 2.5 years. I've been on the Zoning Board of Appeals for that entire time since I first moved here. And prior to that, I lived in Brunswick and South Portland. I've served on the ZBAs in both of those communities. I've lived in in Maine, southern Maine now for well over 25 years now. So I'll never be a true Mainer, but I'm originally from Massachusetts. I spent most of my career in the food service industry, primarily as an executive. So I've got a lot of business background. I'm retired, but still very active on boards. And I do pro bono work for food startups. I'm a consultant to Fork Food Lab, if any of you are familiar with that. They're in Portland. It's a shared space commercial kitchen and food business incubator. So looking forward to being on the board. I think a lot of what I do with ZBA is quite transferable to the way this board operates. So I think I should be able to fit in pretty smoothly. I know there's a lot to learn, but I think I can pick up on it pretty quickly. Thank you.
Next. Can everyone hear me? Is this audio working?
It is.
My name's Freyla Tarpinian. I'm also a newer resident. This is my 3rd summer here in Scarborough. Before moving here from Wyndham, I was on the Board of Appeals there for about 6 years. So I've been through the process on a bunch of different types of properties. I'm a lawyer by trade, so I can appreciate some of the rules that I think apply to us. Although I don't do anything having to do with property, I spend most of my time in the criminal world. I'm the deputy district attorney up in Kennebec, Somerset counties. Other than that, I think I kind of know what we're doing in terms of how it's applied elsewhere. I'm interested in seeing how it is working here and working with all of you, and look forward to getting to work when we have the opportunity to do so.
You're up, Liam.
Oh, I don't think I need to introduce myself, but I will. Liam Gallagher, I'm the Assistant Town Manager and HR Director for the Town of Scarborough. You likely will not see me in these meetings. I'm standing in for Tody, just as the Zoom moderator. But I thank everyone for the new people coming on the board and those who are existing for doing all the good work.
Is that everybody? I think that's everybody, right?
So the next official agenda item would be election of officers. I will allow you to discuss that as you see fit. If you feel like you'd like to discuss what officers you actually need to fill roles of, or if you feel like you need to ask each other questions about what those rules or obligations mean those people have to do. Either Durwood, maybe you could speak to it, or
Yeah,
Chris,
Nick,
having
just-
been the vice chair,
Yeah, Nick, before you get to that, I wasn't clear whether Charles had a question or two about the process or the law or anything before we go on to that.
Yeah, sure. So just as I'm reading through it and read through it, I just had a quick question on the board procedures for hearings and meetings.
Yeah.
So it'd be section B, bullet point 10C, where we can vote to defer decision-making for the appeal with assistance from our attorney, draft written fact findings, and a decision for the board's further consideration. So my question is, so after the assessor gets that 60 days that we talked about, Nick does to review and then make a decision, we can then vote to even extend that 60-day period? Or am I understanding it incorrectly?
There's a 60 days for the board to make its decision after the appeal has been filed. Otherwise, I think it's called a deemed denial. So oftentimes we're within that time frame anyway. If we kick over to a second meeting, if we're not, we always ask the applicant if they have any objection to us moving forward, as opposed to deciding right here on the spot. And no one's ever objected. So.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I mean, we want to be, and oftentimes there are requests for extensions. Sometimes the appeal gets filed because they're up on under the gun to get it filed, and discussions are ongoing. And several times they've asked the parties, both the assessor and the property owner and the property owner's attorney, have asked this board to postpone his hearing to allow those discussions to continue. And every board has its right to make its own philosophy, but the philosophy up to now has been to generously allow those continuance requests. In other words, if the assessor and the property owner are working through some things, then give them more time to do that. In some cases, particularly some of these commercial properties, it's extremely complex, and there might be new data, new leases, new this, new that, that have to be hashed out. And so that is usually the case. And the chairman has typically taken the role of deciding about extensions and setting the date, so we don't have to convene. Although when we can, we try to vote on those extensions. But if it came right down to it, I think the chairman could allow it.
I think we've had a couple that we've allowed them to keep going that have just gone away because of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they've worked it out, so it's worked out well.
That's exactly the point, is that in many cases, instead of rushing them to a hearing, if they can work it out on their own. And that's part of what Nick is everyday life is problem solving. And most of these do get worked out. If they don't, then they come in and have hopefully a fair fight before the board, and then the board decides it.
I think the other one that's come up is snowbirds.
Yes.
We've had to come up because of snowbirds, and we weren't going to make them fly up here for the appeal. We'd wait another month or whatever.
The board typically has been pretty flexible about people seeking extensions based on personal circumstances. Maybe unlike what you'd see in the courts, so Frelo seen in the courts, where if you're in a criminal trial, you better have a good excuse not to show up. But so I think the board's been pretty liberal. I mean, basically all these folks are constituents of the town, and working in all of them we've ever seen are working in good faith to present their arguments. So the board reciprocates in terms of scheduling requests usually. Maybe back to the So I think you need to elect a chair and a vice chair and a chair and a vice chair. And the way to do that, I think, would be for someone to just nominate someone. And
I'd like to
someone
nominate Chris for chair.
I'll
maybe
second.
a seconder, okay. Is there discussion about Chris?
Does he accept?
Very good.
I certainly don't mind doing it. I mean, it's not, there's, really not a whole lot different that happens. So, yeah, I mean, I'll certainly do it.
That was a good question. I don't elect someone that doesn't accept. So maybe it's kind of weird for the attorney to call for the vote, but why don't you why don't you vote all in favor? Raise your right hand. Of Chris.
Do you want me to do a roll call?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Tracy.
Frayla,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, that wasn't close. How about a vice chair?
I mean, if we're going on the longevity theme, it would make sense for it to be Matt. And if that's,
I don't see any themes here.
but if anybody else would want to do it, there's, also there's not, just because you haven't been on this board before doesn't mean you couldn't do it. And most of you have served on other boards that are very similar in similar capacities. So it's not a lot of difference there.
Matt, would you accept?
Sure, that's fine.
I nominate Matt.
I'll second.
Frayla,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
Matt,
Sure.
and Chris.
Yes.
Thank you.
To clarify, that is a paying position, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a lot of thank yous.
Okay. I haven't cashed the last few.
Psychic income. So, did we cover everybody's questions?
Is there any thoughts about whether or not any of you thought the board rules and regulations needed any adjustments? I mean, just as a frame of reference, I think it's one of the best ones I've ever seen, and I've worked in other towns, but I want that to be your decision as a board.
Or maybe you want to work with them a while and decide, but yeah, I agree with Nick that at least you have a detailed sort of handbook to go by. And I don't know about you, but I keep reading it every time, just like all the laws that are in front of me. You always read it a different way, or learn something every time you read it. So keep reading it.
And then I guess another thought to put out there to Chris as the chair is if you guys want to discuss while you're all together here, whether or not you'll meet again, because like I said, there is no hearing in the pipeline. So it could be several months before you would need to meet. I'll let you discuss that, Chris.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe we should set something up for, just in case a case doesn't come up, for sometime in the early fall or mid fall or something. I would be interested, where Frayla has been on another board, at that next meeting. Frayla, if you've read through this, if you knew of any differences from that board to this board, that might be worth a quick discussion on, by us, because some of us have not been on another board, or different types of boards. So that could be good for us to hear another perspective on that.
Yeah, I read through them, but I actually didn't look at that lens. I just read through them, and they look, again, really complete and easy to follow, which is it's good when there's not gaps for the process. 'Cause that's
Yeah.
Chris, can I give you a thought?
Yeah.
Generally, if something does come to us, it's not with days' notice. It's generally, multiple weeks. And if we find that something that is going to be coming to us is as simple as just a homeowner with their value, the workload involved and the thought involved in that is considerably less than when we came across Walmart and when we came across Sam's Club. So I would almost suggest once we do see something coming our way, let's try and have a quick meeting prior to that to just maybe talk about what the structure is that we're going to be seeing at that meeting.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Durwood, could we do that like similar to how we do executive session where we've done some of those before a meeting? So say the meeting's at
We
6.
can have an executive session to talk about process. And I think that that's fair that you're asking your attorney for advice about process, and that'd be a way to talk that through. I think that's appropriate. When I keep saying process, what I don't mean obviously is the substance, and you're not going to be getting into like what makes sense to you or what doesn't in terms of their arguments. But that might be a good way to have a quick refresher on how the hearing's going to go down. So, it goes off really smooth and everybody knows what's going to happen. There's little things like pledge of allegiance, but swearing people in and allowing, the opportunity for the board members to make comments. Sometimes you forget these things. And so there's certainly no harm in doing that. I wish all boards could do more.
That's a good idea, Matt. I think we did do that one other time too, a few years back. So good idea. Is that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
Well, fair enough.
Good.
If no one objects, we'll just do it that way. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Or we feel like we're good?
I have one for Nick. Nick, are we moving toward doing more frequent revals than every 10 years or so?
I would direct you to the town website. I'll certainly explain too, but on the town assessing page website under property valuation or property revaluation, I've included some frequently asked questions there. And the short answer is yes, that is my proposed way of moving forward for the town. Before doing so, I would discuss with council and town management, but my goal would be to do it more frequently. And I had a workshop with the town council in December explaining that. My thought is if you do it every 3, 4, or 5 years versus every 15 or 10, the changes in value will be more moderate and will be better in keeping with the state laws of having everybody fairly and equitably treated if it's done more frequently. There's not a specific date that's been honed in on. I suggested that 2023 might be advisable, but it has not been determined. So it could be then or shortly thereafter, a year or two after, depending on further deliberations with management and council.
Yeah, I read that on the website and I want to make sure that was brought up.
Yep.
Mentioned in the meeting. Thank you.
Nick, I was thinking that the town had, excuse me, that went to a town referendum.
The previous time it did because there was an amount of money that needed to be raised to hire an outside company. My proposal for the next time that it is to occur would be to do the vast majority of the work myself and only so it wouldn't need to go to a vote if it didn't cost much money because our staff is doing it ourselves.
Fair enough. Makes sense.
Can I ask a question? This is actually for Tracy. Do you foresee us having the majority of our meetings via Zoom, or do you think we're going to be getting back into town hall.
I think it could maybe go both ways. I really don't know. Hopefully someday we'll be back in person. But I really don't know.
Are there any other committees or organizations through the city that are having meetings in town hall?
The town council met last night. All but one councilor was present. The other one was doing Zoom. So, and
Okay.
I don't know about the other boards.
Yeah, the
Okay.
ZBA is talking about doing hybrid. People who feel comfortable being present, then fine. While others who want to continue doing it Zoom. We did that actually once, and it worked out fine. There's really no problem at all. So that way, it's flexible, but it's all dependent on what the state allows us to do.
Yeah, if I could just chime in, we are exploring, right now we do have the ability to continue to do remote meetings. And we are exploring how to preserve or maintain some of the remote participation in some of our public meetings that I think the public has generally enjoyed. So that's kind of our challenge right now. And until we kind of figure that out, we're going to encourage committees to remain remote. Based on the workload that this committee or board has, I expect we'll have that fully worked out by the time you need to actually convene in an official capacity. So stay tuned.
Have we ever conducted, an appeals hearing via Zoom yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
It works really fine. We've been doing it on the ZBA for quite a while now. And the ZBA is a very active board. Every month we get at least 2 or 3 or 4 new appeals.
It does seem to have a different feel though when you're in person and the appellant is there in front of you and gets a chance to see it, see everybody. Excuse me. Gets to see everybody in front of them. I feel like if I was an appellant, I would feel more comfortable with that. So hopefully we can, but probably a little different on the zoning board, right? You don't have like
Yeah, but I'll tell you one thing that happens on the zoning board is Brian Longstaff, just like Nick, works out a lot of the things ahead of time, with people who are filing appeals.
Right.
And in most cases, he's able to help them to file an appeal that's solid, that will be able to develop good findings of facts, or talk them out of it because there are some obvious flaws in it. But really the intention should be is to help the person as much as possible. And the other thing I'll mention too is that most appeals that are more complex, you have somebody representing the appellant, either an attorney and or an architect, somebody who's proposing to build or redo a property. So you're dealing with professionals, and those people know how to work on Zoom.
Yeah. All right, anybody else?
I think our timing is good at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, I know, huh? My
Motion
stomach
to
just told me
adjourn.
that.
Shall we make an motion for an adjournment?
I just did. Motion to adjourn.
I'll
I'll
second that.
second. Yeah.
Prayla,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Chris.